The rhythmic shudder of the freight train, a steel serpent coiling through the pre-dawn gloom, was the only constant companion in my peculiar sanctuary. Deep within the cavernous belly of the old railway depot, amidst the ghost echoes of industry and the lingering scent of rust and oil, I had carved out my existence. My laboratory, a labyrinth of blinking lights and humming servers, occupied a forgotten office suite, its grime-streaked windows looking out onto nothing but stacks of decaying pallets and the skeletal frames of dormant carriages. Here, insulated from the world, I pursued the silent, indifferent ballet of the cosmos. My name is Blake Mortimer, and the stars were my confidants, their silent wisdom my only counsel. For years, I had poured my life into the vast, indifferent tapestry of the night, searching for the whisper of life on distant exoplanets. My screens, usually a kaleidoscope of spectral analyses and orbital mechanics, were my windows to worlds unseen, to possibilities that fueled my solitary obsession. My focus, an unwavering beam in the cosmic dark, was currently fixed on a sector of space designated the dead zone, a void where stellar nurseries refused to bloom, where the very fabric of existence seemed to thin and fray. The air in my lab was thick with the scent of ozone and stale coffee. My fingers, calloused from years of manipulating intricate controls, danced across the console, adjusting parameters, filtering cosmic noise. The main display, a vast holographic projection of the dead zone, shimmered with the faint, predictable static of empty space. I leaned closer, my breath misting the cool glass, my eyes, accustomed to the dim glow, scrutinizing every pixel. Then, a flicker. A single, anomalous spike on the primary sensor array, a deviation so subtle it might have been a ghost in the machine. I frowned, my brow furrowing into a familiar pattern of concentration. False positive, I muttered to the empty room, my voice a low rumble. Cosmic ray shower. Or perhaps a faulty capacitor. I initiated a sweep of the adjacent sectors, cross-referencing the data, expecting the aberration to vanish, swallowed by the statistical noise of the universe, but it didn't. Instead, as the diagnostic protocols completed, the spike returned, bolder this time, more defined. It wasn't a random burst, it possessed a distinct, almost structured quality. My fingers hovered over the controls, a nascent unease stirring in the quiet chambers of my chest. I isolated the signal, rerouted it through the most sensitive filters, amplifying its faint presence. The holographic display, previously a uniform gray, now pulsed with a soft, crimson glow emanating from the very heart of the dead zone. What I saw, what I heard through the carefully calibrated auditory converters, defied all known astrophysics. It wasn't the chirping of pulsars, nor the distant roar of nebulae. It was a rhythm, slow and deliberate, a deep, resonant throb that echoed with an unnerving familiarity. A pulse. Not electrical, not gravitational, but something impossibly organic, like the slow, steady beat of a gargantuan heart. It was too regular, too intricate for mere cosmic background radiation. It was biological. A biological waveform from a region devoid of stars, of elements, of anything? I ran the sequence again, then a third time, each iteration yielding the same impossible truth. The signal was clean, undistorted, undeniably present. My mind, usually a well-oiled machine of logic and reason, struggled to reconcile the data. I checked the environmental sensors, the power fluctuations, the integrity of the antenna array perched precariously on the depot's roof, exposed to the elements and the indifferent gaze of the constellations. Everything reported nominal. No interference. No hardware malfunction. The signal continued its slow, persistent thrum, a silent accusation against my established understanding of the universe. My hands, once confident, now trembled slightly as I adjusted the amplitude, pulling the impossible sound closer, letting its rhythm resonate within the confines of my lab, and within the fragile confines of my own mind. Each beat was a hammer stroke against the bedrock of my knowledge, chiseling away at the comfortable edifice of my scientific world. This wasn't just data. This was a presence, a distinct entity broadcasting from a place where no entity should exist. And it was calling to me, its impossible pulse echoing not just in the air, but in the very marrow of my bones, a prelude to something vast and utterly terrifying. I felt a profound, unsettling shift in the cosmic order, and I was suddenly, terrifyingly, alone with it. The steel spine of the railway depot groaned around me, a symphony of rust and strained metal that had become the soundtrack to my solitude. Dust motes, caught in the slivers of light that pierced the grimy skylights, danced in lazy spirals, reflecting the frantic energy I poured into my work. For days, the impossible signal had clung to my instruments, a tenacious burr in the fabric of cosmic order. I was Blake Mortimer, and my world revolved around observable phenomena. This was an affront. My console, a patchwork of salvaged screens and custom-built receivers, glowed with the persistent, undulating waveform. Debunk it, I commanded myself, my voice a gravelly whisper in the vast space. Find the flaw. I began with the most obvious culprits. Calibration protocols were rerun, each sensor meticulously checked for anomalies, every antenna cable traced for the slightest fray. I swapped out filters, purged the system logs, even physically reseated circuit boards, the faint smell of ozone and old electronics clinging to my fingers. Each diagnostic sweep, each cross-reference against known stellar phenomena, yielded the same maddening result: nothing. The signal wasn't an error. It was there. It pulsed, a low, guttural thrum that seemed to vibrate not just through the speakers, but through the very concrete floor beneath my worn boots. It was a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like the beat of some colossal, slumbering heart. Initially, I dismissed it as a harmonic resonance from the distant freight lines, a trick of the depot's vast, empty chambers. But as hours bled into days, the rhythm began to assert itself, a subtle undercurrent to the building's usual creaks and groans. The rhythmic clatter of a passing train, once a comforting constant, now felt like a distorted echo of its beat, each shudder of the tracks a reinforcement of the alien pulse. My focus narrowed to the screen, the waveform a hypnotic, emerald green against the black. I tried to isolate its source, triangulating with every ounce of computational power I possessed. The coordinates stubbornly pointed to the void, the dead sector. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, began to fray at the edges. I ran a new algorithm, designed to strip away all known cosmic background radiation, to filter out every terrestrial interference. The signal, instead of vanishing, clarified. It grew sharper, more defined, its presence a cold certainty that burrowed into the hollows of my bones. The air in the railway depot, already thick with the scent of oil and decay, seemed to thicken further. I noticed it first with the dust motes. They no longer danced randomly. Instead, they seemed to coalesce, for fleeting moments, into intricate, swirling patterns before dispersing again. A quick blink, and they were gone, leaving me to question if my eyes were playing tricks, strained by the endless glow of the screens. I'd collapse onto my cot, nestled amongst discarded crates and tarpaulins, the persistent hum of the signal a phantom vibration against my eardrums. My dreams were no longer mere echoes of the day's work. I awoke often, gasping, the taste of ash in my mouth, the rhythm of the signal now seeming to beat within my own chest, a second, alien heart. The sensation was fleeting, an unsettling phantom on my tongue, gone before I could fully process it. My hand recoiled from the knob, my breath catching. A moment later, a sharp, metallic screech from a distant, unseen break seemed to paint the air with a flash of searing orange, a color I could almost feel as a sharp pain behind my eyes. I gripped the edge of my console, my knuckles white. Synesthesia, I thought, my mind grasping for a rational explanation. My voice, usually steady, felt reedy and thin. It's simply stress. Too many late nights, too much caffeine, too much. The signal persisted, a relentless, rhythmic pulse. It wasn't just data anymore. It was calling. And I was listening. For days, the signal had been a relentless current, pulling at the frayed edges of my focus, demanding a deeper probe. My instruments, a patchwork of salvaged parts and cutting-edge sensors, hummed with a low, insistent thrum, mirroring the growing tremor in my own bones. I ran a hand over the cool metal of a defunct lever, a relic of the depot's industrial past. The rust, a tapestry of ochre and burnt umber, suddenly shifted. It wasn't just corrosion, it was a map. My breath hitched. The jagged edges of the flaking metal began to resolve themselves, not into random decay, but into an infinitely regressing series of miniature, jagged mountain ranges, each crag mirrored in the next, smaller still, until my vision blurred with the sheer, impossible detail. It was a fractal, perfect in its terrifying repetition, etched into the very decay of the steel. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the illusion flickered, then vanished, leaving only the familiar, mottled rust. A shiver, colder than the depot's perpetual chill, traced its way down my spine. Impossible, I whispered, my voice swallowed by the vast emptiness of the space. My fingers, stained with grease and dried coffee, trembled as I reached for my notes. The signal, the impossible pulse from a void where no star should exist, was no longer just data on a screen. Each instance was a fleeting glimpse into an underlying geometry, a hidden order that felt both ancient and profoundly alien. It was beautiful, yes, but a beauty that promised unraveling. Sleep, when it came, was no escape. My nights were no longer filled with the mundane anxieties of orbital mechanics or instrument calibration. They were not malicious, not benevolent, they simply were, immense and indifferent. Their forms were fluid, shifting like nebulae, yet I felt their colossal weight, a crushing pressure that was not physical but existential. I watched, or felt I watched, the slow, deliberate turning of something colossal, something that spanned light years, its surface a swirling maelstrom of nascent stars and collapsing galaxies. The next morning, I tried to articulate it, to explain the patterns, the dreams, to the colleague who occasionally checked on my progress. He was a man whose glasses always seemed perched on the edge of falling. His brow furrowed with concern, not comprehension, as I spoke. The statistical anomalies, they're not random, I insisted, my voice tight with urgency, gesturing wildly at the screens displaying the signal's latest readings. And the patterns. They're everywhere. Fractals. It's like the universe is revealing its hidden architecture, driven by this signal. The colleague listened patiently, his gaze drifting from my frantic gestures to the dusty, disarrayed workspace. Blake, he began, his tone gentle, you've been working non-stop. Your dedication is admirable, truly. But these visual phenomena, and the vivid dreams. They sound like the classic signs of overwork, perhaps even stress-induced hallucination. He pushed a hand through his thinning hair. You should consider taking a break. A real one. He offered a sympathetic but ultimately dismissive smile. Just think about it, Blake. Your work is important. Your health is more so. With a final, lingering look of concern, he departed, leaving me alone once more with the insistent hum of my instruments and the unsettling certainty that the patterns were real, the dreams were echoes. The signal was calling to me. Only me. The cosmos was not just expanding, it was waking, and I was merely a fragile nerve. Ending, vibrating with its impossible stirrings. The city's pulse, usually a muted thrum beneath my window, had become a discordant symphony, each siren a shriek, each car horn a jarring percussion. I saw the world in jagged edges now, the smooth curve of a coffee mug revealing an intricate, self-repeating geometry that made my teeth ache. Sleep offered no refuge, only deeper descents into the vast, indifferent emptiness that now seemed to cradle my consciousness. The signal, once a distant whisper, had found its way into the very sinews of my being, tightening its grip. My colleague's dismissal still stung, a dull throb in the back of my mind, but it also sharpened my resolve. Conventional science had no language for what I was experiencing, no framework for the impossible. I needed to dig deeper, into the shadowed corners where forgotten truths festered. My search led me away from the sterile glow of monitors and the comforting hum of data servers, towards the decaying grandeur of the old railway depot. The air grew heavy with the smell of rust and forgotten ambitions as I approached the massive, skeletal structure. Iron giants, long stripped of their purpose, stood like silent sentinels, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The wind, a mournful lament, whistled through shattered window panes, stirring dust motes into dancing phantoms. Every creak of the vast metal skeleton above me sounded like a sigh from something ancient and weary. I navigated through a labyrinth of derelict freight cars and stacked, moldering crates, following a cryptic address scrawled on a yellowed index card. Finally, I reached a heavy, bolted door, scarred with age and neglect. I rapped on the grimy metal, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. A grating groan preceded the slow, grudging swing of the door. A figure emerged from the gloom, the archivist, a man whose face was a roadmap of deep-set lines, his eyes like chips of flint embedded in a landscape of weariness. He clutched a thick, leather-bound volume to his chest, its edges frayed. His gaze, sharp and assessing, lingered on my face, as if searching for a familiar strain of madness. "You're late," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "The stars don't wait, and neither do I." He didn't ask my name, or what I sought. He simply knew. He led me through a narrow passage, the air growing thick with the scent of aged paper and something else, something cloying and vaguely metallic. We entered a vast chamber, tucked away within the heart of the railway depot, a veritable catacomb of forgotten knowledge. Shelves, reaching towards the unseen ceiling, groaned under the weight of countless books, scrolls, and bound manuscripts. Others have heard them, Blake. Many others. My breath caught. He knew. He truly knew. I moved towards the shelves, my fingers tracing the spines of volumes whose titles were written in faded ink and forgotten tongues. Histories of forgotten cults, treatises on celestial alignments, chronicles of inexplicable mass hysteria. The signal intensified within me, a high-pitched hum behind my eyes, urging me forward. Another volume, a collection of local parish records from the 17th century, detailed a sudden, widespread celestial fever that gripped an entire village. The entries spoke of inhabitants describing patterns in the air, voices from the unlit heavens, before they simply vanished, leaving behind only empty houses and half-eaten meals. My hands trembled as I turned another page. A detailed engraving, stark and unsettling, showed a rust-colored stain on a stone wall, its intricate, branching patterns eerily similar to the fractal designs I now saw everywhere. The accompanying text, a physician's desperate notes, described it as a cosmic blight, a physical manifestation of the celestial madness that had consumed his patients. He wrote of their eyes, wide and unfocused, gazing at something beyond the visible spectrum, their minds irrevocably altered by an unseen presence. The signal surged, a wave breaking against the shore of my sanity. The cosmos wasn't just calling me, it had called others, centuries ago, and their fate had been oblivion. The knowledge I sought was forbidden not because it was evil, but because it was annihilating. The archivist watched me, his flinty eyes reflecting a knowing sorrow. I had found my answers, and they were far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. My breath caught. He knew. He truly knew. It was a presence, vast and ancient, stretching across the cosmos, now reaching for me. The world outside the archive's dusty silence began to fray. My office at the university, once a sanctuary of ordered thought, became a cage. The colleagues who had once sought my counsel now averted their gazes, their whispers like static in the periphery of my hearing. My once meticulously organized research papers, filled with elegant equations and precise astronomical data, were now scrawled over with erratic diagrams and frantic annotations. Star charts intersected with crudely drawn sigils I'd found in forgotten grimoires. The lines blurred between scientific inquiry and something far older, far more desperate. "Blake, your methods have become unconventional," my superior stated, his voice tight with forced diplomacy. He gestured vaguely at a printout of my latest report, its margins crammed with frantic theories about sentient frequencies and the awakening of cosmic consciousness. His eyes, usually sharp with academic rigor, held a flicker of apprehension, perhaps even fear. "This is not the standard of work we expect. Your grant is under review. Perhaps a sabbatical? Time away from the observatories?" I heard his words, but they were distant, like echoes in a cavern. What could he know of the truth? What could any of them know? Their world was a neat, quantifiable box. Mine had exploded into fractal chaos. I saw patterns in the dust motes dancing in sunbeams, heard a rhythmic pulse in the hum of the fluorescent lights, felt the ancient call and the very tremor of the earth beneath my feet. They were blind. They had to be blind. I withdrew, not just from my colleagues, but from the polished hallways of academia, from the polite inquiries and the thinly veiled concern. The university became a monument to a truth I no longer recognized, a place of false light and carefully constructed illusions. I needed to be alone with the signal, with the burgeoning realization that it was not merely data, but a living entity, a caller reaching across impossible distances. It sought me, and I, in turn, sought it, compelled by a hunger that transcended scientific curiosity, bordering on spiritual possession. My apartment transformed into a warren of wires, flickering screens, and stacks of obscure texts. The air grew thick with the scent of old paper and ozone. I modified my equipment, bypassing standard protocols, weaving together modern sensors with antique, arcane instruments scavenged from forgotten workshops. It wasn't just ignorance, it was an enforced amnesia. They weren't just colleagues, they were unwitting agents of the Great Suppression. My paranoia solidified, hardening into an unshakable conviction. Derelict locomotives stood like hulking beasts, their vacant windows staring into nothingness. The air tasted of metal, coal dust, and a profound, lingering abandonment. Here, amidst the echoes of forgotten industry, I felt a strange resonance with the caller. This place, stripped of its purpose, resonated with the idea of a truth stripped of its recognition. I moved through the cavernous maintenance shed, its corrugated iron roof groaning in the wind. My modified signal receiver, a crude assemblage of copper coils and ancient vacuum tubes, pulsed faintly in my hand, its antenna twitching like a sensitive nerve. The signal here was different, less diffused, more focused, as if the very decay of the place amplified its intent. It hummed with a low, guttural intensity. Deep within a forgotten corner, behind a stack of rotting wooden crates, I saw it. They weren't letters, not any language I knew, but they were deliberate, carved deep into the aged timber. Fractal patterns, yes, but also something more. Hieroglyphs of a cosmic dialect, echoing the very structures I now perceived in the mundane world. As my fingers traced the rough lines, a new, horrifying realization bloomed. These weren't random. They weren't ancient graffiti. They were repeating. A sequence, a code, a message. And etched at the end of the sequence, almost too faint to see, was a single, unmistakable symbol, the very same symbol I had scrawled in my notebooks, the one that had appeared in my dreams, the one I had intuitively linked to the caller. It was not just calling me. It had been here before. It had marked this place. The cold metal of the receiver vibrated fiercely against my palm, a frantic, ecstatic beat. The caller was not just a distant signal. And I, Blake Mortimer, was finally seeing them. The words of the detective had dissolved into the air, meaningless static against the symphony of my unraveling. Their world, a meticulously catalogued library of the known, was now a fragile illusion, a thin scrim stretched over an abyss. Sleep offered no refuge, only a deeper immersion into the burgeoning truth. Last night, the dream had begun as it often did, adrift in an impossibly vast void, stars like frozen tears against an eternal night. Not with lungs, but with the slow, inexorable expansion and contraction of cosmic dust clouds, each pulse a silent detonation of creation and annihilation. I saw structures, not built of matter, but woven from the fabric of thought, spiraling into geometries that defied Euclidean space. And within them, the entities. Not biological in any sense I understood, but consciousnesses so ancient, so immense, they made the stars feel like flickering candles. They were indifferent, yet aware. And then, a detail snagged me, pulled me violently from the cosmic ballet. One of the entities, a colossal, shimmering lattice of pure energy, seemed to shift, its form momentarily resolving into a silhouette I knew. I woke with a gasp, the taste of ozone and starlight on my tongue, the image of the passenger seared behind my eyelids. The morning light, usually a gentle balm, felt harsh, artificial. The railway depot. Why there? The image was so vivid, so specific. It clung to me, a tenacious burr on the fabric of my waking mind. A desperate compulsion propelled me out the door. The city streets were a blur of muted colors, the usual cacophony of traffic and chatter softened, distant. Each face I passed seemed to carry a fleeting shadow of that same cosmic indifference I'd witnessed in the dream. A street sweeper pushed his broom with an unnerving, almost ritualistic rhythm. A delivery driver paused at a corner, staring into the middle distance, his eyes holding a depth that belied his mundane task. Was I seeing things? Or was the signal, the presence, truly beginning to leak into the shared consciousness, like dye spreading through water? The air at the railway depot was thick with the scent of diesel, old iron, and damp earth. The colossal sheds loomed like skeletal giants, their corrugated flanks scarred with rust. Trains, long snakes of metal and grime, sat motionless on parallel tracks, their silent bulk radiating a palpable sense of dormant power. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a distant shunting engine, usually a comforting industrial lullaby, now resonated with the pulse in my skull, a grotesque echo of the cosmic breathing. I walked the length of the main platform, my eyes scanning, searching. The few people present were ghosts in the industrial haze. A young couple sat on a worn wooden bench, their hands clasped, but their gazes were vacant, fixed on nothing. Their conversation, if it existed, was a low murmur lost in the vastness of the depot. Further down, a lone traveler leaned against a support pillar, his hat pulled low, his stillness absolute. He might have been a statue. Then I saw him or her. The passenger from my dream. On a bench, just as I had seen, a figure sat. Head tilted, not quite a natural angle, eyes wide, unblinking. Reflected in their pupils, I didn't see the grimy ceiling of the depot, nor the distant, overcast sky. No, in those unfathomable depths, I saw the shimmering, impossible geometries, the spiraling thought forms, the indifferent, ancient consciousnesses. My breath hitched. My heart, already a frantic drum, now hammered against my ribs, threatening to burst. This wasn't a hallucination. It couldn't be. The person was a woman, perhaps in her late 50s, dressed in a sensible, unremarkable coat. She held a small, worn handbag in her lap, her fingers intertwined with a delicate, almost unnerving stillness. He was not moving. Not a blink, not a twitch. He was observing. Or perhaps, he was being observed through. The rhythmic pulse intensified, vibrating through the soles of my shoes, up my legs, into my very core. The low hum of the depot, the distant clatter, the very air itself, seemed to thrum with a hidden energy. The woman's eyes remained fixed, unseeing, yet encompassing everything. As I drew nearer, the air around her seemed to shimmer, faintly, like heat haze above asphalt. For a fleeting instant, the drab, peeling paint of the wall behind her seemed to contort, revealing not brick and mortar, but the intricate, impossible fractal patterns that now haunted my waking moments. They pulsed, subtly, in sync with the rhythm in my head, a silent, visual beat. No one else reacted. The young couple remained frozen, their shared stillness unnerving. The lone traveler continued his vigil against the pillar. They were all there, yet not quite there. They were shells, perhaps, or conduits. The signal wasn't just calling me. For what, I dared not fully articulate. But the woman on the bench, her eyes reflecting the infinite, was a silent, terrifying herald. The dreamscape had manifested, and it was watching me. I found myself at the edge of the city, drawn by an instinct I no longer questioned, to a desolate stretch of iron and rust, the old railway depot. The air here tasted of metal dust and forgotten journeys, a fitting crucible for what was to come. Towering skeletons of locomotives, their wheels seized by time, loomed in the gloom, spectral giants awaiting a final, unsummoned departure. The vast, vaulted roof, a latticework of grimy glass and corroded steel, filtered the wan light into dusty shafts, illuminating nothing but the immensity of decay. Each echo of my own footsteps, a lonely percussion against the metallic silence, seemed to stretch into an eternity. My equipment, a haphazard collection of modified receivers and arcane filters, lay spread on a sheet of canvas amidst the tracks. Here, amidst the relics of human ambition and transit, the veil thinned. The hum intensified, no longer merely an auditory phenomenon, but a vibrational tremor through my very bones, a resonance with something colossal stirring far beyond the stars. The modified oscilloscope, its screen a sickly green glow in the twilight, pulsed with an impossible pattern. It wasn't data anymore, it was a heartbeat, vast and slow, echoing the rhythm that now hammered behind my eyes. I pressed the worn headphones to my ears, the plastic cool against my skin, bracing myself. The sound that poured in was not a sound at all, but a presence. It bypassed my ears, my eardrums, and settled directly into the deepest chambers of my skull. It was a pressure, an undeniable weight of knowing, vast beyond human comprehension. It was the universe speaking, not in language, but in pure, unadulterated concept. First came the vision of scale. Not stars, but the spaces between them. We were motes, less than motes, clinging to a fragile rock, believing ourselves central, when in truth we were nothing, utterly inconsequential. Then, the understanding of time. Not the linear progression we understood, but an eternal present, a vast, unmoving ocean where moments were merely ripples. I perceived the entity, not as a singular being, but as a consciousness woven into the very fabric of that timelessness. It had always been, and would always be. The universe was not a grand design, nor a chaotic accident. It simply was. And within its indifferent expanse, entities of such profound antiquity and scale existed that human life was a statistical anomaly, a fleeting error of biology. This presence, this thing, it had been here before the stars ignited, before the first atoms coalesced. It had watched civilizations rise and fall, not with interest, but with the detached patience of a mountain observing the wind. It communicated no malice, no specific intent, only an overwhelming, absolute otherness. It understood me. It saw my thoughts, my fears, my desperate yearning for meaning. A fleeting curiosity, nothing more. And then, the call. It wasn't a command, or an invitation. It was a resonance, a pulling, an inescapable gravitational force on my consciousness. It sought to integrate my perception, my understanding, into its own vast, timeless awareness. It was a hunger, not for consumption, but for absorption. My individual consciousness, my blakeness, was a novelty, a singular data point in its infinite calculations. It was calling me to dissolve, to become part of its cosmic indifferent mind, to shed the illusion of self and embrace the truth of utter nothingness. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the cavernous depot. The green glow of the oscilloscope continued its rhythmic pulse, mocking me with its relentless beat. My hands shook violently, my vision swimming with the afterimages of cosmic indifference. This was not discovery, this was annihilation. The signal had transformed, and in doing so, it had revealed the ultimate horror: the universe didn't care. And something within that universe, something vast and ancient, had finally noticed me. It wasn't just calling, it was reaching. The railway depot, once a symbol of human progress, now felt like a waiting room for the end of everything I understood. The biting chill of the railway depot clung to me like a shroud, each breath a shallow rasp that feathered into the vast, echoing space. Rust-eaten girders climbed into the gloom, skeletal fingers grasping at nothing, while abandoned carriages, hulking shadows draped in grime, seemed to hold their breath in anticipation. My own breath, ragged and sharp, carved plumes in the frigid air, a fleeting testament to a life I felt slipping away, atom by atom. Days had blurred into an indistinguishable smear, marked only by the obsessive cadence of my work, the frantic assembly of my final, desperate instrument. My hands, raw and trembling, moved with an almost autonomous precision, guided by an instinct honed by the signal itself. I had scavenged, repurposed, and rewired, transforming the detritus of forgotten industry into a conduit for the impossible. Old copper wiring, stripped from defunct motors, coiled around a core of polished obsidian I'd found buried beneath a collapsed section of track. Tarnished brass plates, once part of some forgotten gauge, were arranged in precise, concentric circles, each etched with symbols that had sprung unbidden from my fevered mind, not equations, but patterns, geometries of pure, unsettling resonance. A viscous, mercury-like fluid, siphoned from discarded industrial thermometers, pulsed faintly within a network of glass tubing, catching the meager light of my work lamp like captured starlight. I had foregone sleep, food, even the pretense of sanity for this. This was the threshold. I connected the final lead, a thin strand of silver wire, to the main power conduit, a jury-rigged connection to the depot's decaying electrical system. A faint spark, blue and ephemeral, jumped between my fingertip and the terminal, momentarily illuminating the dust motes dancing in the cold air. The air thickened, heavy with an ozone scent, and a low, resonant thrum began to emanate from the device. My vision swam. The rusted metal of the depot walls rippled, shifting like liquid, the ancient scars of time twisting into impossible geometries. The mercury pulsed faster, glowing with an inner light that was not reflected, but inherent. Then, it was no longer a signal I was receiving, but an imposition. Not a sound, not an image, but a complete, overwhelming download of pure, unadulterated understanding. It was the true form, not seen with eyes, but comprehended by a mind utterly unequipped for such a burden. It was not a thing, but a process. A slow, inexorable unfolding of reality, a cosmic indifference so profound it devoured all meaning. I perceived vastness beyond the comprehension of light years, not empty space, but a dense, living fabric woven from forgotten dimensions. And within this fabric, the pulse. Not a heartbeat, but a rhythmic, tectonic shift of existence, an ancient entity stirring from a slumber so deep it predated time itself. Its purpose was not malice, nor even sentience as I understood it, but a fundamental, unavoidable being. It simply was, and in its being, it reshaped the very laws of the universe, not out of will, but out of its own colossal, indifferent presence. My mind fractured. The geometries I had etched onto the brass plates exploded into a kaleidoscope of impossible angles, tearing at the edges of my sanity. The pulse intensified, no longer a thrum, but a deafening roar that vibrated through every cell of my body, shaking me to my core. I was no longer Blake Mortimer, astrophysicist, but a single, insignificant point of awareness, overwhelmed by the sheer, unutterable scale of what I had glimpsed. My nose began to bleed, a warm, metallic gush that streamed down my chin, mingling with the sweat and grime. The hum of the device became a shriek, the glowing mercury a blinding supernova. The railway depot, with its familiar, solid structures, dissolved into a swirling vortex of impossible colors and shifting forms. And I, Blake Mortimer, had torn that veil. The knowledge, a horrifying, beautiful truth, burned within me, consuming me from the inside out. I was no longer merely perceiving the signal, I was part of it, irrevocably bound to its cosmic rhythm, unraveling with every beat. The entity was waking, and it had taken me with it, into the heart of its vast, indifferent dream.